is Chris, and I'm Cindy, and this is our salty dog Trooper and our salty kitty Stella, and we've got some salty tales to tell you. So make sure you continue watching and also click the subscribe button so you don't miss any in the future. If you missed our last week's episode, then you missed that we pulled the engines out of the little SeaRay and we have them in the garage so we can start stripping them down and figuring out what is going on with them. So here we go.
So you see I'm removing the wires, and I kind of just pull them out and pull them off the engine. You always want to shoot a video. That seems to work for me, where you shoot a video so you know where all the wires go. So when it comes time to put the engine back together, it just makes it a lot faster if you can revert to video or pictures. That's another option too. Gotta see where the connections go, see where it goes through, so the wiring is not going to overheat or you miss a connection.
And there's our trusty heater, keeping us nice and toasty.
So you see a lot of painter's tape on the wiring, and it doesn't really pick it up in the video to see what that is. But basically what that is there's labels on there to make it a little bit easier to go along with the videos and the pictures of where all the wiring goes. So like right here, I kind of labeled that's where all that wiring ends up. And again, it's just another tool that you can use to make it easier when it comes time to put the engine back together.
So some of this may seem a little boring compared to our usual content, but we felt that it was important for people to see how we take apart the engine and what we're gonna find. So that's why we included all this. So just stick with us, it'll get better. Now this is when Chris and I start arguing because he's yanking them through and ripping off his tape, and I'm telling him how he should really be doing it the correct way.
See over here we got a shelf. It's a good idea to try to get some sort of shelving system or a bench if you want to make that up, but some way to be able to store everything where it's neat and organized and you can easily identify parts and whatnot. So that's what we have here, and we have a storage rack for each engine because we're rebuilding 2 engines. Now we're using the vacuum to clean the engine, and you always want to do that because dirt is a big problem inside engines. There's a lot of moving parts and dirt can hold that up, and you can also block oil galleries and oil getting into different parts throughout the engine. So the next step you see here is we're taking apart the bell housing and the back part of the bell housing. There's a plate there that you can use to take off and perform some inspections.
It's cold. We're inside and you can still see our breath. And there's the trusty Christmas present heater. But once again, I have 2 pairs of pants on and 2 pairs of socks. How many pairs of pants are you wearing?
Right here, we're removing the bell housing. For those of you who don't know, the bell housing mounts the engine to the transmission. Now we're removing the damper plate and the flywheel. The damper plate is what cushions the engine to the transmission so you don't break the transmission when you put it into gear. So what you see here is a lot of corrosion on this engine. I don't know if we mentioned, but this engine only got about an hour's worth of use. And that corrosion is because when we had the engine put in, the boat was left at the fuel dock, not plugged in, and it was the beginning of the season, so there wasn't enough battery power to keep the bilge pumps running, and there was a small leak from the raw water hoses that weren't yet hooked up to the engine. So we're hoping that they would bring the boat over to our slip and plug it in so that those batteries be maintained, and it only had to stay that way overnight. Now I'm removing the bolts for the intake so that we can remove the intake. Now we're removing the lifters and rocker arms. And you see I got a piece of cardboard there. It's always a good idea when you take an engine apart because these all kind of machine themselves together as the engine works. And even though this only had an hour, it's still time that it was being machined while it was running. So you kind of label where they all go. So when you take it apart, you put it right where it's supposed to be. That way, if you go to put the engine back together, you know right where it belongs. As I take the cardboard away, you see a bunch of other holes there. And my next step will be to remove the push rods. So I also have those labeled because remember, as we talked about, everything gets machined. And then, whoop, there's a bent one. And then there's another bent one. So that's part of the evidence of our issue here with these engines, but you still mark them, know where they go, because there's a couple different lengths here, so you know where all lengths go. What you can't see in the video is my beloved bride is making fun of me, saying I'm not marking them properly, but you see me put them in my hand so they're in order, so I can put them in the cardboard to where they all belong.
I'm your beloved bride?
Why, yes, you are. This is a engine stand. Next step is to mount the engine stand to the bell housing. And hopefully you can see here, I got a little trick to be able to get the engine stand onto the engine. It's a little bit easier to get on than it is to take off, but we'll kind of see how this goes.
I was absolutely blown away that is what holds the engine on the engine stand. Just those bolts. I thought for sure there would be something more to it, but that's all it was.
Next step here is to remove the fasteners out of the head. And I don't know if I mentioned this when we're taking the intake apart, but it's always a good standard practice to remove the bolts in the same torque pattern as you torque them down. So basically in reverse order. Based on how long these have been sitting around, they probably shouldn't really warp that much, but it's just a good standard practice to detorque the same in reverse order as you torque. That way you're least likely to do that. All right, YouTubers, this is an exciting moment here. We're going to be pulling the head soon. As you saw, I had the pry bar, kind of broke tension between the gasket and the block and the head, just to make sure it comes free. When you pry up, you got to be careful because there are pins that help align the head to the block. So they're only about maybe a ½ inch protruding, so you don't want to pry this too much or the head will just come flying off. And if the head's any good, then you run the risk of possibly cracking it and having to throw it away. Also, you see I have a tarp underneath the engine stand and I have a tray there. That just helps keep the liquid in one spot and helps you clean up, and the tarp also helps from any of the coolant getting into the floor and ruining your garage floor. Off with your head. If you notice, when I did pull the head off, you want to try to come up as straight as you possibly can so you don't disturb any evidence. Because right now we're doing a detailed inspection of the head just to see if we did have a head gasket failure. Because you can't really take that off the table of that possibly being part of the problem. So right now I'm taking a look at the water jacket area, the cylinder liners. You see me pointing out in between the cylinders is where you most likely will get a head gasket leak. So we're kind of looking at the gasket itself right after we pull it off the head to see if there's anything out there that jumps out at us. Now we're taking the other head off, and it's just the same as we did when we took the other head off. What I'm doing here is just checking flatness. I didn't get any evidence on this engine of a head gasket leak, but just in case we're looking to reuse this block, I'm just checking for flatness. You saw me check it in one direction, but you actually check it in multiple directions. You check it crisscross, you check it lengthwise, you check it vertically, and you're looking for nothing more than 0.02 of an inch of a gap in any one spot. And this one looked good. Right now we're taking apart the valve train. First part you take out is the valley tray, Lunez tray, a bunch of different names for it, but the purpose of that tray is to hold the keepers for the hydraulic lifters down. So we took that out, and now we will remove all the keepers and remove all the lifters, all the while keeping in mind we want to make sure that we have them labeled to where they all go, because again, can't say it enough, everything gets machined together, and so you want to be able to put it in the same position if you put it back together.
I forced Chris into a little bit of a dance break because we were just getting so tired.
Next step, get into, I just like to drain all the coolant out because you're going to be flipping this engine back and forth, so it's a lot easier when there's no coolant splashing all over the place.
I was actually a little surprised at how much coolant is inside an engine. I'm learning so much during this process, and I'm actually grateful for the opportunity to learn.
Onto the oil pan removal. We're taking the bolts out of the oil pan. I asked Cindy to go get me a bag full of bolts, and she creatively filmed me the whole time while she was grabbing the bag. She was also singing very well and dancing quite a bit too, at least in my eyes.
Yay! He likes my dancing. Make sure to tune in next week and you'll get to see what we discover. Uh-oh. Extra parts. You gotta fight for your right to party.
Our hearts beat to the city streets. We began to feel the fire.